1995 was the year following the players' strike when fans were a bit down on baseball, and many fans and media credit our guest for being the person who bring fans back to the game, although he's probably too modest to admit it. His play revolutionized the position of shortstop. Used to be little guys like myself, and ended up being big guys like him, and paved the way for players today like Alex Rodriguez and Derek Jeter. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hall of Famer Cal Ripken Jr.
This is being taped, so if I walk really fast both ways, make it harder for you. Thank you for allowing me to come in. When you're retired from baseball, you don't get quite the attention that you used to on a daily basis. So I decided to write a book so I can get a little attention. Not entirely true. The book was pretty interesting. It was formed out of everyone thought, because I played in 2,632 games, that I had the secret to endurance or longevity or perseverance. And when I went out on the speakers circuit after baseball, a speakers bureau said, "Hey, you got a message to tell." And I went, "Oh yeah, what is it?" And they said, "Well, you can speak on leadership and teamwork and all kinds of things that sports provided you with." And one day, someone asked me to speak on perseverance, and I was thinking, how do I define perseverance? I mean, it's not a really easy thing to do. I mean, it's some ways it's a stubborn side of you. And I remembered a conversation I had with Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter was in Colorado in his All-Star game. I think it might have been his first All-Star game. I'm thinking around 1998. The record had already been broken. Derek came up to me and said, I get tired after 2 weeks of playing, guy, I want to take an off day. How'd you do it for 16, 17 years? And I gave him just sort of a humble answer. I said, I just love to play. I'm kind of resilient. And he kind of gave me this haunting look, like he was disappointed. And I thought that I needed to get him an answer. And right after that, a reporter asked me if my record could ever be broken. And I immediately said, yes, if I can do it, somebody else can. And then he said, well, what traits would that player have to break your record? So then the light bulb went off in my head, and I started putting the framework together for my answer to Derek, which turned out to be part of a speech. Publisher looked at that and said, hey, this is pretty good. Why don't we shape this into a speech? And so the book was born. Now, in my post-baseball education, it's really interesting to me that when I'm put in business environments, or you're dealing with a culture of people in your office, not unlike chemistry in a baseball team, when you go out there, you find that a lot of the ways that you had success on the baseball field really translate. It's really about principles and values. And really, that's what the book is really about. Principles and values that work all the way across the board. And it's just told in the framework of perseverance. So I'll give you a little tease on a couple of sections in the book. There's some stories that help cement the message that's in each part. For example, there's one section in there that's called Courage of Your Convictions. And the courage of your convictions was one of the things that Dad gave me that said, look, when you're right, when you believe that you're right, you get into your core values of right and wrong. When you believe you're right, you have to stand up for what you believe in, even though other people might be weakening around you. And when you do that, and I had to do that in the street because a lot of people thought when you're struggling a little bit, you should actually take yourself out of the game. I was criticized for that, but I really believe that my approach to the game was right, which said, I'm a professional athlete. People are buying tickets to come watch me play. I have an accountability and a responsibility to my teammates. I should play. And so I believe that's what I should do. And when you do that, sometimes you're called stubborn. Sometimes they look at you. And in my household, when we were learning about stubborn was considered good because it was courage of your convictions. The only time it was bad was when you were arbitrarily stubborn for no reason. And my mom sometimes would use examples of my dad to tell us the difference. One of those examples of my dad was he was in professional baseball in the minor leagues, so he was gone most of my first 14 years of my life. And then when he was home, since he didn't make any money, he had to actually work a couple jobs. And so because he felt bad being away so much, he tried to do things for our little community so the community would look after his family when he was gone. One of those things he loved to do was plow out the neighborhood. And he had this access to an old farm tractor that he went up, and when it snowed, he started up right away. He built a box drag behind it, and we plowed out the whole neighborhood, and people really appreciated that. One time in the worst snowstorms, he went up there and tried to start it up, and it didn't start. And so he looked around, he found this big old hunk of metal that attached to the front of the tractor in the form of a tractor crank. And he was going to crank this tractor, so he gathered his boys around, and he said, "Boys, come on around, I want to teach you how to crank a tractor." I had just turned 16, a little bit of a smartass. And I said, "Dad, is this really a skill I'm going to need in the modern era?" And he exhibited good old-fashioned parenting skills. He said, "Just shut up." And so he was telling me, he said, "Okay, push it down away from you, and then let the torque of the engine bring it back up. Push it down away from you, and let the torque of the engine bring it back up." I immediately sensed that there was a safety issue here. And sure enough, he wasn't getting the results that he wanted by turning it. So he said, "I'm going to windmill this thing, but I never want to see you guys do it." I go, "Don't worry, Dad." So he pushed it down and pulled it up. So he's using his strength to actually turn it. So it turns it faster and faster. And sure enough, on his upswing, it fires, it backfires, it does something. And it slips off the fitting and comes in the direction of his head and pops him in his head. Cut opens up. He falls back a minute. Blood starts pouring out of his head. I panicked a little bit. I was 16. I said, "Come on, Dad. Let's put you in the car. We're going to the hospital." So he jumps in the car. I start driving frantically down the road. He sees our house on the right-hand side as we're passing by, and he goes, "Pull in there." And at first I thought, this is great. He's going to pull in there and grab Mom, and Mom will take that responsibility off me. I was really all for that. But once we went into he went to the house, he went into the bathroom and locked himself in the bathroom and started doctoring up his cut and put some butterfly bandages on it. It was kind of a bad job, but at least it stopped the bleeding and kind of cleaned it up a little bit. It still looked really bad, so I'm assuming we're going to go to the hospital. So we get back in the car. I start driving to the hospital. He said, "No." Drive back up to the barn, and he started the tractor, and plowed out the whole neighborhood and never went to the barn. Now, would you think that's good stubborn or bad stubborn? I'll give you one more example. This was the dilemma that my mom had in the house. He also loved to work in his garden, and sometimes in his garden, a groundhog would get into his garden and start eating up his crops that he really liked. So he was going to put a stop to this groundhog one day. He grabbed an old lawn chair, a thermos full of coffee, and a shotgun, and went out and sat in the garden waiting for the groundhog to show up. Didn't show up the first night, didn't show up the second night. Dad's getting a little cranky on the third night. By the fourth night, you hear this pow at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he comes in, drops his coffee cup in the sink, and says, "You won't be eating from my garden anymore." Now, do you think that's good stubborn or bad stubborn? It's a little of both. It's an important fact that you might want to remember. We didn't live on a farm. We lived in a quarter-acre lot, and we had neighbors. And so that's when we had a third level of stubborn put in our house. It was good stubborn, there was bad stubborn, and then there was stupid stubborn. Now, stubborn, that whole kind of story about stubborn, as long as you stand up for what you believe in, and then you know that you're right, and you push forward, that's a really important element of persevering. And I think stubborn is a good trait that you can have work for you. And it certainly worked for me. My dad was called stubborn. I was called stubborn. But I always thought of it as, if I'm riding the right wave, I'm doing the right thing, then you need to push forward a little bit harder. One of the other categories in the book, I can give you the whole list if you want. The book was shaped a little bit to modify the list. But my original list to Derek Jeter, which I sat down and personally wrote out, you got to have the right approach. You have to have a strong will to succeed. You have to have passion. You have to love what you do. You have to be competitive. You have to be consistent. You have to be a person of conviction. You have to have strength both mentally and physically. And the last one is you have to have the ability to manage your life. And so I break those down and give you a little bit of a sense of what they are. Now, the author came in and said, "Hey, you're a little redundant in a couple of these areas. Let's call one preparation. Let's call one trusting relationships and anticipation." And we really were able to shape some of the stories and some of the meanings in the book in a much more refined way. The life management one, if I could take a minute to explain that one. I think all I mean in the life management one is many times in our lives, we're trying to look around and we're trying to juggle a lot of things. And so achieving balance is very important. And sometimes achieving balance, you have to actually bring some level of control over areas of your life that you don't think you can control. Therefore, you achieve balance. An example for me in baseball would be, I played 21 years with the same team. One perspective, you might say, hey, you didn't have to go through change. But if I could tell you that I played for 9 different managers, 9 different bosses, change was occurring all around me. So every time he had a new boss that came in, he had a new staff that he was brought in, and me as the person being managed, I would have to wait to see what the expectations were for me. That drove me crazy. So I found out very early on that I could help the manager manage me simply by walking into his office, shaking hands, congratulating him on the job, and then saying, asking him a question like, how do you see my spring training unfolding? And then that would cause him to say, well, Cal, you've been doing this for a while. How do you see your spring training unfolding? So now we had sort of a relationship. And then I would say, well, I used to think the more games I played, the more at-bats I got, the readier I was for spring training. But now I'm at a point where I need some specialty work. I need to work in the weight room. I need to work on the side, got to have some extra hitting stuff. So I need to plan a little bit better for my spring training. So they would turn around and say, well, why don't you go home and work out your schedule and bring it back to me? I would go down and work out every day of the schedule for 6 weeks and then lay it on his desk the next day. And then the managers would use that as a template to manage me. Now, all other players really surprised me. It seems like a simple little exercise to go in and talk to your boss or your manager. But all the other players, they would look at me and say, how come you know you're not going to Vero Beach? Or how do you know you're not going to make the trip across to Fort Myers? How do you know when you're playing so you can plan? And I said, well, simply do this. You go in and talk to the manager. I was surprised that very few players were willing to take that step. It's not combative. It's just using your head a little bit, bringing some sort of control over the area so you can feel really good about your job. All the other players would rather come to a locker room in the morning, look up on a big board that has a roster, and if your name was circled that day, you were going on the trip. If it wasn't, then you had to scramble around and do whatever you wanted. But that's one example of trying to exert some sort of control over your life. On the personal side, I think we all struggle, and as you get older, the struggle continues because then you have a family and you do those sorts of things. And in order to be good at your job, you first have to decide that, hey, it's not 2 separate lives. Your personal life and your business life are kind of interchanged because you're the constant part in both lives. In baseball, I saw a lot of baseball players that did a poor job of that sort of balance in their lives because they went about it by saying, I'm a baseball player and I'm a family guy, or my personal side's over here. The ones that actually included it as part of their lives did pretty well. So I think the first ones are that you have to really accept the fact that it's part of your life. And in order to be the best you can be on the field, you need to have some sort of balance and be successful off the field as well. Baseball is really tough, and I guess it's better to give you an example of what I'm talking about. My first 6 years in the big leagues, I was single, so it was really easy to look out for yourself. I ate when I wanted to eat. I slept when I wanted to sleep. You signed autographs in the parking lot till 3 o'clock in the morning. It didn't matter. You weren't impacting anybody else but yourself. Then fell in love and got married, and I was still pretty cool because my wife had the flexibility to fly to San Francisco or New York or Chicago, and she could see me in my pockets of my time. So it worked pretty well. Then we had a family. Then we had kids. And then when you have kids, your world changes, all for the better. No doubt about it, but it does change drastically. Our first child was born November 22nd, 1989. So if you're thinking in terms of a baseball season, November is the off season. So I'm working out at home. It's more stable in my life. And when my wife had a C-section, I was able to lay down a mattress in Johns Hopkins Hospital and stay in there for 3 or 4 days and learn how to be a dad. And I fed my daughter first, changed her first, was able to bond with her like few other dads could. And also, when you're in there as new parents, we were a team. So we were scared, and you could learn how to be a team together come February, we went to spring training. My wife was pretty comfortable with the kids, as was I. So then you could actually go on and do your thing. My second child was born July 26, 1993. If you're thinking in terms of baseball, that's dead in the middle of the season. And if you think in terms of historical context, 1993 was 2 years before the record breaking. So if you back it out, 2130 was 1995. You're looking at 1,800, 1,850 games. And there was a growing expectation for me to break this darn record. All these people that didn't really care or didn't want me to do it or were my critics, they all turned positive. And they started writing glowing things like, this is an opportunity for Cal to save baseball. Baseball really needs Cal to break this record, even if it means missing the birth of his own son. And that was written and that was talked about, and my wife heard those things. She read them, so when I would come home, she'd be all upset. And so I'd try to figure out, okay, how do I make this right? How do I bring some sort of control over this situation? Use your brain a little bit so that you can still exist. So I put my arm around her. I said, honey, I'm going to be here. No doubt about it. I'm going to be here. This is the right place for me. You can take this to the bank. 100% sure I will be here no matter what. This is my place. And then I'd walk out of the room and go, oh, shit, what am I going to do? Because I was really in a tough spot. And there was a certain expectation on both. So I thought and I thought and I thought. I said, there's got to be a win-win-win here someplace. I got to be able to figure out how I can approach this. So I thought about it, and I got sort of an idea. Came back to my wife, put my arm around her, and said, hypothetically speaking, it's a good way to start most conversations with your wife. I said, if I were to miss a game because of the birth of our son, it would be the absolute right thing to do. I would have no regrets for the rest of my life. I knew I did the right thing. But this day will forever be stamped in the history of baseball as the day that the streak ended, and that'll be our son's birthday. Is that fair to him? And she bought it. So sometimes you got to appeal to the territorial nature, the protective instincts of the mom to kind of get yourself out. Now, I stretched that story just a little bit. I mean, there were some issues of being uncomfortable. And again, working through those issues allowed you to maintain balance in your life that you could actually be successful on the field and off the field. And to end that story is, my wife, my boy was 9 pounds and he was 2 weeks early. And since my wife already had a C-section and she was really uncomfortable, the doctor said, hey, I'd like to get him out. And there just so happened to be an off day between Minnesota and Toronto. And I came home for the birth of my son. That's that distraction they warned me about, isn't it? But, so I went on and hit a home run on his birthday, and everything was pretty cool after that. But I guess the point is, you got to use your brain a little bit in being able to achieve balance. And you try to exert some sort of controls over areas that you don't think you can. Too many times we just accept, what the rules are. And if you really step back and say, okay, how can I approach this in a different way that might get a different result? And if you keep an open mind and you start to think about it pretty well and use your mind, it doesn't have to be combative. It can be very effective just by making the right appeal at the right time, to your boss or to anyone that has control over those issues. So that's just a little flair of the 8. I'd like to keep this a little bit more informal and answer some questions if you have some, or just let you go on your way if you don't want to sit here and listen to me anymore. But I'd love to answer any baseball questions. During this sort of book tour, many times the question of steroids and those things start to come out. I've already answered those today. So do you have a burning desire to figure out steroids? Me neither. But I'll be glad to take any questions you have, if you have some.
Hey, Cal. I'm actually a huge Oriole fan and grew up watching you every day on my satellite dish.
You don't look so big.
What's that? Very fun. I actually want to talk to you about the Orioles. I mean, it's kind of depressing being an Orioles fan these days, and I think, the management and the ownership love to see you get back, on the field or as a general manager or something to turn around the organization.
I can't achieve the balance in my life by going back. Thank you very much. The Orioles, it's really interesting to me. The Orioles seem to have been in a half position of trying to compete and a half position of rebuilding for a lot of years. So they really they lacked a plan. And this year, they seem to have fully committed to a rebuilding process. They traded Bedard and Miguel Tejada. They got 10 prospects back that hopefully will develop at the same time so they can be good all at once. After all, that's how the Yankees really built their baseball model. It wasn't because they just opened their checkbook up and started paying players. They built from within. And the core nucleus of their players that they end up winning the World Series with and staying really high were grown from within. And they all came together at once. And that's what the Orioles are trying to do. It looks like they got some talent back. I mean, Adam Jones looks like he's a fabulous athlete in center field. Luke Scott's got off to a really good start in left field. Their closer right now, George Sherrill's closed games out pretty well. So there's renewed reasons for optimism. But from my perspective, they need to work from a plan and stick with it. And so time will tell whether will have that patience. But from my standpoint, they're actually working the plan pretty well now. And that could be a 3 or 4 year plan. I'm not sure, but I'm with you. As an Oriole fan, it was really easy to be very proud all those years. We had a bunch of rebuilding processes that I had to endure, which was haunting when you're inside of it. And you want to try to do everything you can to restore the respect and the pride that came with being an Oriole. And I think they're on the right track now. But certainly it's hard when the Red Sox fans and the Yankee fans start drilling you. You got nothing to fight back with. Although I do say, I've been in the 80s, the Yankees sucked. And I've been in Yankee Stadium and if they weren't any good, nobody came to watch them. And so it was not a great environment, but they've got a nice run going. They built a good baseball model, making good baseball decisions. So it's cool. I answered about 10 questions that time, didn't I?
Not the question that I had.
What was the question? Oh, am I going to get back into it?
Get in the dugout again?
Buy it. We got a lot of employees watching this now. I can pass the hat around. We can all be partners. The only question I have, or the only, to be perfectly honest with you, I love the flexibility of my life right now without the baseball schedule. And the reason I do is that my dad wasn't there to watch any of my games. He wasn't there in ways that I wanted him to be there. I have 2 kids. I have an 18-year-old daughter that's trying to make a decision for college right now. So she's right on the fence. Within 2 weeks, she's got to make it. My boy is 14, going to turn 15. He's in 8th grade. He's a super athlete. Big kid, too. He's already 6'3" at 14. So we're trying to grow him the right way. But I enjoy being there for them. I don't know what's going to happen when you send them off to college, and then you have all your time free to do that. But for right now, I could step back in many ways in baseball, I think, and make some contributions. But I'm kind of delaying that decision a little bit until I push the kids out a little bit. Sorry?
Hey, I have a question about ego, because it seems like a lot of us, like not just in this room or Google, but people everywhere struggle with ego. And it seems unfathomable to me, like to be like in the kind of position that you've been in and to be able to deal with that. Because we see like all of these cases where people go off the deep end because they just get so consumed by their growing ego. So how on earth do you deal with like all these years of world telling you how great you are without that totally consuming you? Because I mean, I get a single compliment and my ego starts to flare up. I can't imagine what you deal with on a regular basis.
Well, I think it's a good question. The ego question, there's a lot of guys that have been around that their egos get in the way, because they lose perspective. And when people compliment you and send you, upwards and on a pedestal, you start to believe that and you feel that and you lose perspective about what you do. I think we're all made differently. We have hardwiring. Some have a bigger ego. Some have to feed the ego. But it's important to recognize who you are and then how you can deal with the different levels of your ego. I don't think I have an ego that gets in the way. Matter of fact, sometimes I think I lacked early confidence to really jump to the big leagues. when you first come to the big leagues, I think it's better to have an ego, like to think that I should have been there 5 years ago when you just got called up, and then kind of go about your job in a more assured way. I really had to kind of get into it. Didn't know if I was going to make it or not. A little scared, a little timid at first. Got ran over in the first month and a half of the season. I was 7 for my first 68, and I was on the verge of being sent down. Everybody was telling me how to hit, including the bat boy. That's not a good place to be. But then once you develop that sort of confidence, then confidence in what you do, a quiet sort of confidence and being sure about yourself certainly is a much more valuable tool than your ego. And maybe I was built in a certain way where I didn't have to check my ego that much. But raising your kids, it's really important when you get preferential treatment everywhere you go, and people are happy to talk to you and those sorts of things. I wanted to make sure that when you raise your kids that you maintain perspective. Just because you can hit, throw, and catch doesn't make you any better than somebody else. And that message needs to be driven in. We all have special talents. Some we like to watch on TV, some become celebrities, and then they start to think that they're actually more important than somebody else. But we're all talented in our own right, and just because we don't get attention for those things doesn't make us any better. So perspective is a big thing for me. I don't know if I answered your question either.
So I have a question. I think a lot of what this book came out of, and obviously what you're famous for, is your perseverance, and you have this record for this streak of not missing any games. And I want to know what you make of some of these contracts nowadays, where people will only play a certain number of games and then need a certain number of time off for recovery and other things, and it's sort of taken on a new dimension.
Very much so. When you sign big contracts and make a lot of money, a couple things happen. There's a more conservative approach. I got an investment in you. I don't want to risk hurting you, so therefore I want to coddle you a little bit more and take care of you. And sometimes the players themselves see it as an individual accomplishment, and so they're looking after themselves as an individual. I always thought the streak represented something that was really pure and honest, which I didn't touch on yet, which is a sense of responsibility to your team, to your group. So if you're coming to the ballpark to play every day or compete, there's 24 other guys on the roster that are doing the same thing. You owe it to the other 24 to come to that ballpark. And in a culture of a business world, you're all trying to do great things together, and you need the synergy of all your talents to come together in a certain way. And if you recognize that you have a sense of responsibility to the person to your left and to your right and to the people you work with, that's a much better approach than an individual approach. We live in a sports center sort of world now, and it seems like all the athletes now are going to showcase camps, and they're going to how hard can I throw, how fast can I run, how many home runs I can hit, no matter what the score is. And I'm going to showcase myself. And when I hit a home run, I'm going to style on a little bit so you get a little bit more attention for what I did. So it's an individual sort of effort as opposed to a team effort. And I think that's a negative thing. And so I think it should start with a deep understanding of a sense of responsibility to your team and your group.
Hi, Cal. This is maybe more of a looking for a suggestion from you. I have 2 boys myself, and I started coaching Little League, and our first game was last weekend, and I had a little problem. I had one kid doing a dirt angel on shortstop. I had one boy biting his brother, and then my last kid who came up at bat, first grader, came in and whacked me with the wooden bat on my knees. I'm looking to get out of the game. Any advice?
And these kids are 16, 18 years old? First and second graders. It's really interesting. You identify a problem that a lot of young coaches have. I mean, we expect the kids to be disciplined and ready to perform high school drills when they're just starting out. And I think a cool thing that I just got an idea when you said they're doing dirt angels, I think you should incorporate dirt angels in your practice. So let's all stand out and demonstrate how you do a dirt angel, whatever else, and then try to who can have the best dirt angel. Get that out of the way, and then try to do some other things. But part of the experience of learning baseball, or learning anything, is you have to engage them. They have to like what they're doing, or have to look forward to going. So if you have fun, if you can appeal to them in a fun way, and then figure in your mind, okay, I'm going to teach them these 3 things. And if you can have that sort of mindset, I think you have a real good chance of having a good positive experience. I think too many times people think in terms of, okay, we got a game and we're playing with young kids and the end result is winning. And you forget that the real result should be in the development of your kids. So if you have a mindset of how I'm going to teach and the games are just going to be a way for them to learn, that's different than, okay, what can I do to impact the game and have them win? That creates pressure and then people end up running away from the game. But I love the Dirt Angels. I'll have to put it in one of our camps.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. I was a little bit curious. Back in your playing days, who were some of your best friends in baseball? And if they were going to write a book like yours, what are some of the characteristics that you think really help them succeed and stand out in the game?
Very interesting question. I had to defend Brady Anderson on Boomer Esiason's show today because he was one of my better friends. And he hit 50 home runs in 1 year, and then in the era of the steroids, the way that he took care of himself and the way he looked, in a muscular way, they automatically assumed that he was juiced. But I can tell you he wasn't. One of the things about Brady, if you could package up Brady's focus, his single-minded focus on what he needed to do to prepare, for the work that he put in, but his single-minded focus when he was in that moment, he was trying to hit. You couldn't crack him. You couldn't take him from that sort of focus. And in order to have success, you can't, we multitask and we're all over the place, but you really have to come back to some sort of, core focus and what you really need to do. And Brady was really, really good, almost to the point of being inconsiderate. Because if you're that into what you're doing, you're oblivious to what happens on the outside. And I prided myself on a sense of awareness of what was going on and in the consideration. But his focus was so strong that sometimes they would think that he was just rude and just inconsiderate, which is kind of a negative thing. So I would package up Brady's focus, Brady's preparation. Nobody worked harder than Brady in the offseason or during the season. And it's clearly any key to your success is not just winging it, not coming up to the game and figuring out, let me try to hit. It's the thousands of swings you took, in the cages and beforehand that prepares you for the moment of 4 swings during a game. And if you don't take those 1,000, you don't work on your timing and your skill, you won't have long-term success anyway. You might have 1 or 2 blurps of success, but it's your preparation and your willingness to work that really carries you to your success. So those 2 traits on Brady. I tell you what, Eddie Murray was one of my favorite teammates too. And from one category I would take from Eddie is he's got the biggest heart and cares, and he's probably the most loyal person that you ever meet. Eddie wasn't portrayed that way in the media, because he didn't have a good relationship with him, and they tried to pick him apart a little bit. But he would take all the call-ups in September, young guys that just came up from AAA, and he would make his house available to them. They would stay over. He would take them in. He would work with them. He would do all kinds of stuff. So Eddie's big heart and his loyalty was probably a good factor from him. But we probably could go on with all these sort of traits, but there are 2 off the top of my head. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Before you go, we got time for 2 more questions. So you'll go, and then I've got one for remote. So
Cool.
Oh, remote.
So question about the faith of your conviction and or stubbornness. How do you know when it's getting in the way? You said ego can get in the way. So can't stubbornness also get in the way? And how do you know when you're impeding others' progress?
Okay, it's time to quit. It's time. That's a really good question because as the streak went on, first the managers just put me in the lineup. They created the streak. I didn't have any power over those managers. I couldn't go in and tell Earl Weaver, listen, I know you've been managing 15 years, but I'm here now, and you're going to play me every single game. It didn't happen that way. The streak happened. But then somewhere along the line, they said, okay, the streak is too big. It's too, it's already there now, and me as the manager, I can't manage that anymore. I got to go along with it. So I'm powerless to change that. I used to think that was a weenie way to look at it. Because if you're the manager and you're hired for the purpose, you need to do your job like I need to do my job. If you had a good reason for doing whatever, then you have to take responsibility for that. But I tell you what, there are things when you get so darn stubborn And I guess that's the point, that good stubborn and bad stubborn, there's all kinds of grays in between those two. But if you get so focused on what it is, maybe you can't see clearly everything that's happening. It could become a negative. And there was one part of the book that I had to face that issue. I was getting hit so bad. We weren't winning. I wasn't playing well. I was miserable. And I was thinking, maybe I don't have the answer. Maybe I'm not doing it right. So I went and searched out Rick Sutcliffe, a teammate of mine, because he had more experience than I did. And it was really funny. I think I whined to him a little bit, and I think I was feeling sorry for myself and all that. And I said, maybe if I just take a day off, and I know I have to deal with the media and all that kind of stuff in the short term, but maybe, just maybe, it'll put it back to where it's supposed to be. And then he really stood up, and he goes, I'm pitching tomorrow. And he said, if you take a day off tomorrow, you'll certainly be in the front pages, the business section, the sports section, whatever section of the paper. There's one section of the paper you'll be in for sure that you haven't thought about. And I said, what's that? And he said, the obituaries, because I'm going to kill you. And he didn't say it with a smile on his face either, so I wasn't quite sure. But he went on and explained himself. He said, look, I'm a pitcher, and I pitch one every 5 days. When I pitch, I want the best opportunity to win the game for my team that I can. You do so much more than just hit and field. So really, you just need to focus on what area you're not really doing well in. If you're not hitting, then come out here and figure out how to get a hit or a bunt and do something where you can contribute. But I need you behind me, and the other 4 guys need you too. And so it really was a way to kind of push me back in there. But that was one moment I was feeling really, really low. But certainly your point's well taken, is sometimes you can get so much into your zone or your stubbornness or whatever else that you might need to seek some counsel or perspective from the outside to get you going back in the right direction.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, so this is our last question. This comes from Lori in Irvine. Hi, Lori. I was at Camden Yards. There she is. I was at Camden Yards the evening you broke the record. Not me, Lori, unfortunately. Now that several years have passed, and you've touched on this a lot today, what's your perspective on breaking the record now?
So Lori was there 1995. That was, wow. Yeah, it's amazing. I think 300,000 people told me they'd been at that record-breaking game. But the perspective is pretty interesting, because in many ways it seems like a snap of your fingers, that much time has gone by. And it just seems like yesterday it happened. It really was the most wonderful celebration that wasn't about me, I don't think, and it really wasn't about the record. I think it was about baseball in general, because baseball was going through a pretty tough time. And I think when most people think about the origins of baseball, it's like when baseball was a game. When people played it, it wasn't all about the money, and it was about other things beside that. And I think linking Lou Gehrig's streak and my streak together at that time was one that was looked upon in a sort of old school, old values sort of way. And it made everyone feel good about it. So we all had a chance to celebrate. And by taking a lap around that ballpark, that's the last thing I wanted to do. The game was official in the 5th inning. They kept clapping and clapping and clapping. 22 minutes worth of clapping. That's a lot of clapping. And they pushed me out of the dugout and said, we can't get this game started unless you make a lap around the ballpark. And when I started to go out there, I felt like, okay, I'm obligated to do this. Let me just get it over with, and maybe it'll happen. But once I started shaking hands, it really became a one-to-one, person-to-person sort of experience that just took the whole thing into another level. And by the time I got around to my own little family and celebrating, I could care less if the game ever started again. This is too cool. So the celebration was really probably the highlight of my, if you're saying you're looking for one human moment that happened in my whole career, that would probably be certainly it. The best moment of my career probably was when we won the World Series in my second year. We beat the Phillies, and I caught the last out of the World Series. And the feeling that comes over you when you record the last out, the finality of the moment, it's almost like part of your childhood dream. You wanted to be a big league player, you wanted to win the World Series, and now you know what that feels like. So those two feelings really was great. And I'll never really forget the celebration of 21-30 and 21-31.
Thank you very much, Cal, everyone here in New York. Really appreciate you being here.